Uh,
Hello, everybody. This is Davina from Teacher Success Coach with another educator from across the world who is going to introduce herself to us and tell us what country she come from and also the type of school she work in. First of all, I would love to thank you for accepting the offer to come online.
Thank
And
you.
I'm really appreciative of that for you to share your journey post COVID-19. What does education now look like for you? Where
Okay.
you are, etc. So please
So,
introduce yourself and tell
yeah,
us more about what's going on.
my name is Naima Warden. I am a theater arts educator and administrative leader in New York City. I have been a teacher for 16 years and I have an administrative license as well. And I am excited to be here. I'm a big fan and believer in global arts education, and I have serviced students from low income families all the way to very privileged and prevalent homes. So I have a wide, diverse breadth of experience in what students need and how students learn.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. What age group do you teach?
Currently, I teach high school. So I teach anywhere between ninth grade and 12th grade this year because my principal at one point was trying to save jobs 2 years ago. We have a very enlarged 11th grade class. I guess that would be your equivalent of year 12. And
Okay, 16 to 18.
yeah,
Okay, okay.
so they're about 16 to 18. Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, right. 1 year on, 1 year and a half on. What are some of the challenges that you have, some of the triumph that you have experienced going back to school?
I think human interpersonal relationships. There's a lot of social emotional learning that's happening within, I think, across education. And students were very isolated. And we've done lots of studies on like when you isolate a student, that's when they start to perform in low or they're not as like present. And so it's really interesting to see the presence of students. And I think it's the actual connections and interactions and having the dedicated space to work on whatever it may be, whether you're into math, whether you're into science, whether you're into sports, being present in the space where it's actually made to happen. I think there is something about having that kind of routine back for students, all students, being a positive. And just as a mom myself, it's kind of great to know that there's an accountability for where my child has to be. So like not worrying if they're like out on the street or working a job that is like extensive and challenging, like they're actually showing up and they are present and working towards like a major goal.
Thank you. That is so true, though, because in terms of the worry is less. At least you know they're at school, eh? Which
Yeah.
is so very true. Yeah. Thank you. How have things changed in relationship to classroom discipline?
Mm.
Since you've come back.
Um, you know, so I was talking about this with some of my students, right? There is very much like the multifaceted personalities of a person. And I think that's something that you learn by like having to go to school and then eventually going to like between school and job and then just eventually a job, right? I have like a persona at home and a persona at school. And for 18 months, that's been invaded. It, you got to see a lot of what was in my home, the people that were in my home, how I share in that very private space versus what space I have and how I cultivate boundaries at school. So I think that one, there's like, I think there's been like sort of a mixed bag of emotions. Like we're in a very feeling time, a very feeling state. Even just going into what's happened in America, we've been expressive about how we feel. It's not about action and necessarily data driven. It's about like there were these actions that happen and we have an emotional reaction. There's impact because of the actions that have gone on. So in terms of discipline, I think that at least what I'm observing is more of the home traditions and culture that's showing up in my classroom versus the assimilation to American culture. In American culture, you're like, or in various cultures, you're coming into the classroom, you're saying good morning, miss, or good afternoon, miss. You greet and you're sitting in a chair and you're focused in one direction, things of that nature. We were already pulling away from that structure and trying to like move our chairs into circles or trying to like move them in spaces where there's a little more like almost ensemble building for those spaces. Now, I think, that we're witnessing either the success or the difficulties of parents in disciplining their kids. I also think that there's like a disconnect on socialized etiquette and social behavior, because a lot of the things that would teach us about how like social cues have been shut down for so long. So, you don't take out your phone when you're in a theater. You're not going to just walk across the room because someone can see you. Like, how do you remind somebody like you need to wait and then you cross the room? Like, I think that's been interesting to see the exercise of free will. And I know I'm constantly questioning, do I want to totally shut that down? Because something about that is very much primal and important. And who's to say that is the etiquette? Who's to say that is proper behavior? I think maybe that's what I'm in the midst of trying to figure out, like, what is acceptable behavior in society? What is like the expectations of behavior for me?
That is so wonderful. Thank you for that, because that's exactly where I'm at in the situation and thinking, okay, they're very noisy, but I'm also encouraging them to work in groups and in terms of collaboration. So therefore, do I expect them to, before they come, to sit quietly, face the front and do your work? But I'm saying I cannot expect that of them when I want them to be collaborating with each other and I want them to be creative. So therefore, I cannot have that model of discipline. I need to change the model, because the model which we were taught of and we were using long ago was they come into the classroom, sit quietly, face the front, and start writing. And that's not realistic, because human beings cannot do those things.
They can't do those things, and it doesn't work.
Exactly. So when a child is not doing that, do I say that this child is being rude and disruptive? It's interesting, because I've been teaching in one school, and one of the things that the principal point out and the deputy have point out in my class several times, oh, you need to be firm and you need to be stricter with the students. No, I can't be. I want them to have respect, because if I'm saying to them, I want you to be innovative and independent thinkers, I cannot want you to become programmed and as, cuttings where, you come in and you sit as a robot, you write what I'm talking about, and then you close your book and you leave. That's not learning. And therefore, I cannot take that up as part of disciplining them. I have to think, okay, as long as they're doing the work and they're not excessively rude, it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I think that's something that we had to learn. Like even Trevor Noah was talking about, hey, you guys want me to, I got on this show and you expect me to wear a suit and a tie and that equates to you that I have the knowledge to talk about political like commentary. However, if I have an afro, if I'm wearing sneakers, if I'm wearing a hoodie every day, does that take anything away from the knowledge that is within me and that I seek? And I think, while I'm not saying we have to throw out, the baby with the bathwater in some regards, like there is a time for a suit and tie, I think at times, but I also personally, I don't necessarily want to wear a dress and a suit jacket every day. It doesn't really work for my content. So, but it doesn't take away from the knowledge and the skill set that I have. But for some people, it does. We talk about judging a book by its cover. And I think sometimes, even when we're evaluating teachers, the cover needs to look like uniformity. And I think there's something to be said about the break in uniformity. Like Zoom gave us some structure in uniformity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and actually teachers a lot more control in it. I can mute you. I can kick you out the class.
Exactly.
I can put you in the waiting room. Like something about that was actually very compelling. Like if I didn't see your camera on, I'm not going to panic because legally I can't necessarily ask you to, but illegally, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that means I can't be held accountable for you doing the uniformed behavior. In looking at how schools are structured, or even some of the biggest, best, brightest businesses are structured, it's actually the individuality that like contributes to the whole that lets them succeed, i.e. Google, i.e. Apple, i.e. like so many tech companies are like, come as you are, and maybe we'll wear the same color, but we're all different people with a certain amount of knowledge. So I don't know what it is in terms of behavior, because, hey, kids were like, I remember giving an assignment saying, I want to see you out for lunch in the world, take a selfie, show me that you're enjoying life, because they're inside all day. And having them kind of collage that together, they were like, oh, I didn't realize how much we do have in common. Like we walk by the park, we walk on the street, we get ice cream. It started a conversation. So, I think there's something to be still researched and probably discovered. And the unfortunate thing is that education moves slow. Education moves slower than most sciences. And so while innovative thinkers are looking at the speeding trends of behavioral changes, psychological changes, I think it takes a little while to figure out how we want to see them implemented in classrooms, and reevaluating and setting expectations of what that looks like in a classroom space. So
that's so very true, though. That's so very true, because the more something I was saying all the time, I say COVID, as much as it was negative, it was also positive for educators, because it meant that education had to keep up and move on with the times, because education was way behind
Oh,
all
really?
other industry.
Yeah, we were
Yeah,
really behind. We're still behind
yeah,
because
exactly.
I think there was an opportunity missed. I think we were forced to last year because we were still unsure of, you know, how many cases were breaking out. Vaccinations were still like on a rollout. But you know, there was like an opportunity missed for changing the culture of classrooms. Like at least to me, a lot of the new learning that I was able to do, I became like such a big cheerleader for global arts education because all of a sudden, with a captive audience, I was able to invite Australia, Johannesburg, London, New Zealand into my classroom and talk about theater arts in a way that I wasn't able to do. I mean, even 4 years ago. You know, Zoom, while it had its challenges, also opened up this Pandora's box on, hey, I can take this authentic Suzuki course. And that's really amazing, where I'm learning from a Japanese like master in this acting technique that will impact how I do Shakespeare. And then I could talk Shakespeare with like people that are in Britain that actually do it as part of their culture, where and we can share these ideas and thoughts and become now such more broader, like innovative and thoughtful thinkers. You know what I mean? It was like beyond the art form. It was about how we think about it. And even just seeing like certain students talk about like to California about science and about technology, or other students like diving deep into math theory and looking what's happening in Texas and in Phoenix. It was like, you don't have that time per se in a structured day.
Yeah.
But now with like a little bit of freedom and a couple of clicks, a whole world was in my classroom. I don't know. I think there's something to be said for that. Even a very heartwarming moment this year, a student's sibling was immunocompromised. So he couldn't come into the first 4 weeks of school. But his teacher was able to Zoom him in so he can see what work was being done, what we could have been doing. Why couldn't we do that?
Exactly, isn't it?
Isn't it about opening the doors? Isn't it about opening up the spaces? And I get that there's regulations and realities of like, and the law to protect students, but there are more ways to incorporate and invite a vast amount of people into our classrooms than sort of saying, well, you guys go here because this is where you live, or this is how smart you are, or this is like what you're gifted in. Versus like, hey, I got this niche and you got this niche, and let's talk about work together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is very, 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 very true. And what you say is so true, because you know the fact that there's once my son was off sick, and the beautiful thing about it, because we went back in the physical, but the beautiful thing about it is I didn't have to take the time off sick. I was actually teaching from, he was upstairs, I was looking after him, but I could teach my classes through Teams, and looking at them, doing my work, and I said, okay, this is what I want you guys to do for later, and it was beautiful.
So there's that. I also agree. Like, I was not I was a mom that was home, but I was not present. I'm more present now. I can be honest, because once my work day is over, I'm home. But like, I would be upstairs and the kids would be nervous to even like go around upstairs, because they were like, oh, she's teaching, or she's directing, or she's coaching a student, or something else is happening. So I think like both sides of the coin really do exist. But I don't know what's going on in the UK, but we used to have snow days here. Now they've taken away snow days and they made it like Zoom days. So we don't lose out on any learning.
Okay, okay.
So,
Well, no,
like,
we've never had snow days, so
yeah, I mean, here it's like impossible to get around if it's a big snow. And so
Mhm.
the fact that they're like, okay, no problem. It's not like you're really missing school. You have to do Zoom, but like, or asynchronous learning or synchronous learning. But, at least you can do it. I was okay. Like, usually that's a a little God wink you can get for
Yeah,
like
yeah,
some time off.
yeah.
That now that's no longer existent. But I also appreciated when I had asynchronous days, I
Mhm.
can just put up the assignment and have kids
Mhm.
ask me questions, and it gave me like a moment to catch up. um
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
miss that probably the most.
Yeah, yeah. Because you see, it means that you are not catching up, you're constantly chasing your tail. Eh? That's
Mhm.
one of the things with education. And when you had that time, it was, oh my goodness, I could catch up on the walk of, thing. But the fact is now you're thinking, oh my goodness, there is no catching up. You're constantly rushing on, and never seeing that you're completing it. That's the
Well,
thing about
I think that, bless those teachers. Like the teachers, I'm thinking elementary school teachers really need like the same kind of applause that, a lot of the essential workers got, because
yeah, of course.
they were kind of keeping things running, and they've been in like conditioned
Mm,
to keep the structures of like a regular work day,
mm,
along with the stresses of like cleanliness, health, safety, all those like ever-changing guidelines.
mm, mm.
um i I felt like coming into the building out of shape. Like,
Really?
yeah, like, but it's so funny because many of my colleagues are like, it feels like it's June and it's only December. Really, we were saying that in November. It feels
Yeah.
like it's June. Like we were all saying, no, it's got to be June, because we're already so like exhausted and burnt out.
Yes. Yes.
Like we just can't figure out how to get past the exhaustion. And
Mm,
in debriefing with everyone, it was like, well, we were working like 4 classes, not even 2 or 3 classes,
mm,
twice a week. So
mm.
it's like I had 2 courses Tuesday and Thursday, and then 2 courses on Wednesday and Friday, and I had a planning day on Monday. And it was busy, but it prepped me for the week so that
Mm,
I can actually get the work accomplished by
mm,
3.
mm, mm.
Um, I just I think that coming back, we have the longest approved day in New York City in this school. So we go from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I come in at 9 a.m. And just even working from 9 to 5 feels like I don't recognize this schedule anymore, because we went to a truncated, like, sort of split hybrid schedule.
Yeah, yeah.
um, I think where we miss the mark, and I think where leaders miss the mark, is actually thinking about how we're bringing in all the staff, all the faculty, all the kids back into the fold of a routine.
Mm, mm,
If we're talking about like discipline, right? Some of it's routines and
mm,
ritual,
mm,
tradition. And I think we've, you know, at least the thematic of the pandemic is that I want to get back to normal. I want to go back to the normal, when
mm.
the truth of the matter is we're not in a normal. The norm has been challenged, And now we have to think about these new routines, these new rituals as a way of how we walk in the world. There's no way for us to go back to what was happening. Same way as I'm not plowing the fields. I don't know anything about farming, but my grandmother did, and my father did because they had to. I don't have to. That's not my generation, right? But I'm looking at my son and he doesn't know how to use a library catalog. It's not necessary for him anymore. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it has to be something where like we have an ability to move forward in some regards and also fold in different means of living.
It is very, very true, because things have changed, the goalposts have changed, and we need to also change with that.
Yes.
There's nothing called normal anymore, and there would never be normality anymore. We need to, the quicker we realize that we cannot say that how we used to be, we're going to go back to that, the better we are going to be able to move on.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we're thinking about whatever used to be, I think we can learn a lot from it. I think we can acknowledge that there was something to it. But I think if we get stuck in this is how it used to be, it's not going to happen. We're not going to move forward. And I think we're going to just be stuck in not learning from what was already presented.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Right. Like by the time we were already doing things, we were like, we never even considered looking at what happened in 1921, 22, what happened during like the plagues in Europe, what happened, like how did we get out of such major health crises? Because they existed, they had to exist. That's how we developed medication. I think, and that's impacted education because with that happening, schools closed, we had to learn different things. It gets pumped. There's cycles of everything. Like at one point, math became very popular. Then when we're in need of new writing, new ideas, writing becomes popular or like what's pushed. When we're in a mode of like war or of struggle, all of a sudden sports gets pushed very forward and into the foreground of like our societies. Science has been picking up because technology was taking big strides, and now we're going back to science, right? Like there's a lot of science programs and science scholarship and schools coming about, and I think that's fine. I just wonder like how we're learning about our human condition in this. And I predict that the stories that are going to be coming out are really going to impact how we move forward.
That's very, very true. That's very, very true. Another thing is, a lot of time they were talking about lost learning. What are your views on that?
Oh. So the gap was already, I think that is the true bread and butter, like the financial crux of education. How are we closing the gap? How do we fill in the gaps? The gaps in education were already so broad for students of color, for ENL students, for students with disabilities. Again, I think that everybody's story is very different because while maybe gifted and talented students might have declined in some of their skills, and I don't really believe that either, to be honest. I think that the access that students with disabilities gained is exponential. all of a sudden now they were able to see arts. They were able to go through museums virtually. They were able to experience the world, and it might been through technology, but they were able to actually put their like minds towards seeing places and spaces that they may want to eventually aspire to go. I also think that it really was a learning moment for parents on how challenging their student with disabilities could be when, you know, there was like, or at least to me in 10 years, I mean, I've taught for 16 years, but in a particular 10 years of teaching, it felt like the responsibility for discipline, etiquette, speech, even just like thought pattern was the onus was on me. And now this again was like looking at parents and finding a way to support them at home with their child. It's like, I don't have the answers about your child. You live with your child. You can provide me insight on how to like better service your student. And I think that finally like came to light. Like there are a lot of parents not able to do that for a number of reasons. I think depending on where you live and where you are, the financial burdens and strains on upkeeping a way of life doesn't allow you to invest in your children anymore. You know, we're still a little bit, I think as a society, as a holistic society, we're still a little bit behind. You know, there was one parent at work and one parent at home. That one parent at home oversaw and understood like the personalities, the structures, the routines. They were carrying on the teaching with teachers, right? Like you came home, you helped cook dinner, you set the table. So I think like, I don't know if there was per se learning loss, because I think parents had an opportunity to really learn their kids and see what their day is like. I also think that students were able to engage in so many different crafts, skills, modes of thinking that for whatever reason we don't value as learning and teaching and structure in school. And I'm not sure why. I also think that there was like a connection to nature, a connection to natural sciences that developed because there was actually time to engage in them. The water was clearing up. Kids would tell me like, I could see things in the sky. Like I actually had time to like identify stars. Like all of a sudden, some of the like habits without technology started to arise. And while I don't know if anybody was reading anymore, but I think the space to read was provided. You know, depending on where you, like, again, where you live, the fast pace of a city, or even I'm finding the fast pace of suburbia, doesn't allow you like the time to read. We're always talking about literacy. How do you write? How do you read? How do you like synthesize? But if you're on a computer and you're only typing and you can get an Audible book to read to you, and there like someone's giving you commentary about every subject. You can go to YouTube University or Vimeo University. I think it becomes really hard to like actually figure out what it is to learn. So I don't know if there were gaps. I think the gaps again were in social emotional learning. Like I'm watching students really struggle with, how do I interact with this student? How do I share space? How do I ask for help? Because I didn't have the means to ask for help when I was at home. How do I how do I move in spaces and places? Because not only of like just what the place demands, but now with health restrictions and health guidelines that I don't know if I necessarily believe in or want to conduct or want to, be part of. So I think the gap is really in the social emotional learning.
That's interesting. Thank you for that. Because I agree with you, because when we talk about lost learning, I have so many issues with that. Because as you rightly point out, the children have learned so many different skills, but yet not acknowledged. Is it because it is not academically inclined, therefore it's not acknowledged? But the sad thing is that skill that they have learned prepare them so much more for the world out there than only the academic have been preparing them for.
Well, I also think that this idea of what constitutes as academia versus what's not, is part of a financial like pull and push towards the business of education. Whether you got a grant, a scholarship, paid out of pocket, got a loan, if you're an educator in general, at minimum, you have 2 degrees. Most educators are like trying to achieve high excellence and have anywhere between 3 and 4 degrees. I have 3 and some certificates. So, me being invested in how smart I am means that a teacher is employed, facilities are paid for, books are paid for, people are getting paid for their books, their work, their thinking to be studied. And, that self-taught learner, that at-home learner isn't valued anymore. I don't know. I know my grandmother, very smart. She could read a New York Times paper and tell you about it and synthesize it up until she was 89. My grandfather was like the first class of Stuyvesant boys, and that's a very prestigious high school in New York City. So to be in the midst of that kind of intelligence, but there weren't necessarily college graduates. But now it's like, so then by the time it was like my father and uncle, they had to be college graduates. Great. So by the time it's myself, right, I have to have a master's. Like, it keeps the validation in a certificate starts to reign supreme. And I think the pressure, especially to say that you are certified in something for people of color, specifically Black, Brown, Asian people, needing to prove their like professionalism, to prove their competency in a subject, when there's a wealth of knowledge in books and in practice. I think we're losing out on trades. And if the pandemic taught us anything in terms about intelligence, can you fix your toilet? Because when that was breaking down and no one could come into your home, well, what do you do? And now all of a sudden that poor boy that's very interested in pipes and is willing to go to trade school and only get a debt of $10,000 can make $300 fixing a toilet. But we don't value that in this society. Why? There is something about this self-taught person. And I think that eliciting so many reward, kind of like, you do this, you get a reward. You go and do this learning, you get pay bonuses. You get this certificate, now you could go up the ranks. Only has perpetuated this. I learn in need of money, not the love of learning.
Yeah, that's so true though.
Mm-hmm.
That is so true. That is so true. Oh my goodness, that is so true. Thank you for that. Is there anything that you have learned in the last 18 months that had implemented in your teaching? Right. Is there anything that you've learned in the last 18 months that you could now say, yes, you've spoken about it before, but I just want you to summarize. Is there anything in the last 18 months that you have been taught through the pandemic that you actually now implement in your teaching?
Humanity. I mean, I'm always learning about humanity, but like the humanity of kids and the humanity of families and how we engage in the behaviors of our human condition. I feel like that's what I'm learning the most. I guess like just even in personal growth, like it's interesting to see my peers and see, so many respected people leave education because they are going to do something that does mean something to them. Not that education didn't, but they're actually following through with a goal, following through with like some part of their passion. And I think that it's at least been teaching me to say to kids, what do you want to do? There's so much that you have to do in the world all the time. What do you want to do? I think we ask students very much to risk and take these great risks in sharing what's happening with them, sharing what they're thinking, sharing, deep diving and taking big, bold choices, or just like failing big. And if like they're doing that, I've started to, I think what's made me a very strong teacher is I've always been very interpersonal. I don't have this wall of, well, this is me and this is you. It's like, well, I have a family and I have pets and I like to do creative things. Like I made bread, and let me show you the bread that I made. I was always mindful to take those moments. I've been even more mindful of taking more moments of sharing my stories, experiences, my failings, my successes. It's been so interesting. Like my mom, who's also an educator, and my dad's an educator, would tell me how important it is to have story time. Like my dad, as his like retirement, as he retired from his principalship, sorry. This is an art school. And this is what they play as their bells. This is the last bell of the day, everyone, as we hit 5 o'clock.
All right.
The day is over. Doot, doot, doot. Aren't you inspired?
That's funny.
So my dad, he left a library because he believed in the power of stories and he believed in the power of writing. My mom actually would read a story to kindergarten classes every week as part of her principalship. And thinking about like two dynamic leaders that I've been made out of, I brought that into my classroom. Specifically this year, I brought like artifacts of Miss Warden. And so I will bring in like an album or I would play a song, and I've actually gone into story time every week with my students. This week we had to skip it because we have like presentations. And my kids were like, we have to miss story time. And they're like 16 years old. So it was very interesting to see them in that mode and in that space and place. It's so cool to like have that experience.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you. How do you feel that the pandemic have affected you in relationship to your health and well-being?
My health and well-being, I'm tired.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in therapy. I've shared with my students that I'm in therapy in hopes that they understand and know that self-care and self-wealth is by all means at the forefront. Like I can't be okay if I'm not taking care of myself.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I have to be the best model of what I would
Yeah.
want my students to do. On top of the
Yeah.
fact that I'm doing it for my kids, we've gone through a global trauma,
Mm.
and we've
Yeah.
gone through a global trauma 3 times
Mm.
between suffering through George Floyd, through the pandemic, and our White House insurrection. There's no way, even if you were close to it or far away from it, that you didn't suffer some sort of psychosomatic trauma from what you witnessed, experienced, or have gone through. So I dedicated my time this year to go into therapy to talk about the struggles and how it impacts my work. I think that health wise, I'm healthier in terms of going back to work because it keeps me physical. I think the amount of truthfully, the amount of weight gain that so many people had during the pandemic is concerning because we heard shutdown, lockdown, but we weren't teaching ourselves on how to continue to move, to continue to stretch, to continue to keep our heart rates up. I have a sister that's a nurse, and that's all she talks about. It's like the continuous heart disease within the workforce people. So police, teachers, and health professionals. I also think that for me, I was also at my healthiest because I was able to cook, and I've kept some of that going still at home, which was really I'm have deep gratitude for that. So I was able to teach my kids to cook, do more meal prep. I started to teach myself the time management, the time that I actually do have to consider myself and my health. What I do think is lacking is time. The pressures. When you're at a low income school, the stress becomes about gathering the kids, helping getting the kids to be in a place in a space so that you could feel accountable for them. I had that experience. I understand that. I'm in an opposite situation where being in a gifted and talented school, the demands of excellence and high standards make it almost impossible to achieve them and continue to get students to achieve them. So, along with the schedule, just coming in prepped and ready every day to challenge kids to be high level thinkers is really hard.
Yeah, what? Yeah.
So I've learned to everybody. I think some of the best teachers were like, hey, I have an aim and objective and these learning targets every day. I've given myself the smart break and said, here are my learning targets for the week. Here's my aim for the week. I'm only doing one aim, one objective, sometimes two, and a certain amount of learning targets every week. Because to do any more than that, I think less is more. And so I'm trying to find the space where less can be more. I don't know. Time. Time is just the biggest factor. I didn't have to call out. I can make an asynchronous assignment and not feel like I was losing out on days or having to worry about someone being in charge of my classroom. Now, if I want to take a day off, I'm thinking about all the details of that. And so I don't take the day off. So, like, I'm trying to negotiate some of that because we need mental health days. We need more than just sick days. We need mental health and stress days. And I think that they should be increased. It shouldn't be like you get 2 mental health days, you get 5 actual sick days and 3 personal days. I think we need like 7 mental health days or a mental health day per month. Because right now we are strained.
Yeah. It is very, very true. Very, very true. It's like yesterday I was talking on one of my programs regarding education because people are not aware of the stress that educators are going through. And it is very, very stressful because we are, as much as we're going under this pressure of COVID, we still have to, produce the results. And that is really challenging. Constantly have to produce the results.
Yeah.
No matter what.
I think that all of it is just hard. Like it's really just challenging. We have almost 3 to 4 cases turning up in our school, and we have 3,000 students every day. That's what we see, out of the kids that we test, right? Currently, right now, like we're still under the marker in terms of how many people are getting affected, but the numbers are climbing, and it is so challenging, really, to just figure out like how to remain safe. Like I'm in my office and I control and clean my office. But once I go out of my office, it's like, I don't know what anyone could have. And that is a mental strain too. I think also just considering like my husband's immunocompromised, he has very severe asthma. I also have a daughter that's immunocompromised too. She has very severe asthma. And thinking about like, if I bring something home and though I may not have it because of the people I'm in contact with, I can get my spouse sick, I could get my daughter sick. That becomes very like, it's a lot. I think I've seen a lot of like the educators around my tenure starting to take sabbaticals. I'm included in that. Like I have inquired about a sabbatical because while the DOE has not given transition time, I can take the transition time, and I'm very fortunate that I can do that. But there's so many educators that are not in that position, and I think they are getting quickly worn out and worn down.
It is very true, because it is a really hard process. Hence the reason why the burnout rate and the rundown rate, because we have to be responsible and accountable for ourselves and for our students.
Yeah.
That's another thing about it.
Yeah.
That's another thing about it. What would you say that, how would you say that the pandemic have affected your ability to teach?
It made me smarter. No, I'm a good teacher. It's hard to answer that. And I'm not saying that as a boast. I mean, I come from educational pedagogy, like my parents put DNA of teaching. Even if I didn't want to be a teacher, I would be a teacher. I love situations that force me to be creative beyond my control. And I definitely know that I had to become creative. I also think that it's made me, like, again, all of a sudden I started thinking about what rituals, routines, and traditions I want to actually hold on to and think are valuable. Like I had some space to say, you know what, telling stories are valuable. Like I loved when I heard my teacher had a breakup at my age because I was like, oh, shoot, I'm not by myself. Or I love sing alongs and I don't care if you can sing or can't sing. Like I want to sing along with you because being in a choral was very valuable to me. Like we knew all these songs, we knew all these things. Like to hear voices in unison all of a sudden made you feel not alone. And you couldn't do that in Zoom, right? So when we have a chance, I want to sing a song. I don't care how loud or terrible we sound, but let's do that. It's made me aware of like when I say, oh, I don't have time for that, or I don't have space for that, to really evaluate that sentence.
Interesting.
Because when I really can sit down and take a breath and like, you know, people were, oh, I don't have time to breathe. You do. Oh, I don't have time to take lunch. You do. Like, I used to say that very often, and now I recognize I need to put the priority to me, because if I don't exist, I can't teach. And so it's made me really evaluate on how I use that sentence. Like, I do have time to do that. I do have time to make a phone call. I do have time to connect with a family member. Like one of my students was absent for 4 days. And most of the time I would be like, can somebody else call them? Because I don't have the time. Only for me to say, you know what? I do have the time. And I made the call. And how that changed our relationship, because they felt so seen by me. Just evaluating that sentence, like my ability is being able to really, really acknowledge the time I do have.
I like that, because you do hear a lot of educators say, oh, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. I'm always rushing. I don't have time to have lunch, etc. As I say to everybody, when it comes to lunch and my break time, those are very special to me. I do not want anything interrupted. I'm not having any discussion regarding meeting during my lunchtime, during my break time. Those are mine. I'm not doing any photocopying around those times, because that's my time. I'm very, as I was saying to a teacher, she said, oh yeah, well, we didn't have time to photocopy and you have to photocopy during your break time. No, I'm not. I said, my break time and my lunchtime is very special to me.
Like if I have it at the end, maybe, but for the most part, I don't have the time, or at least if I'm giving the time, I don't want to feel like, well, I have to, like the shutdown was like so freeing to my bodily functions. Like I was able to use things in my time, like the same way kids were discovering the habits and their preferences on learning, on like when they get up in the morning, on their routines, or what was a positive or negative routine. I was also discovering that for myself, like, hey, I could get up. It was good for me to get up at 7:30, even though I didn't have to start teaching until 8:30. Like I was able to take care of my family in that time. I was so happy to be able to click off my camera and sound and use the restroom when I wanted to. I loved the ability to, meet with people so quickly. Like my day was very full, even through like remote learning. So, now taking some of those good qualities into my personalized teaching, it's like, well, what do I have the time for? A guidance counselor came to me and wanted to ask me a question. Well, I like her, and forget about liking her. We both care about students. So I'm going to make the time to talk to her, because she's coming to me with a concern.
Yeah.
If a kid wants to work a monologue or audition with something, I'm going to make the time. So I think if anything, I'm like looking at more and more is like the essence of that. What does time mean? And like, how do I say, or how am I utilizing it? Because it has value and people are showing me that. And I think that if they're showing me my time has value, I have to start feeling like I value it the same way too.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Very, very true. Mm-hmm. Very, very true. Thank you for that. Right. The last question, what tips would you give to educators who are in this same situation that we are in moving forward?
I don't know, truthfully, because moving forward means that we've learned from this. I know we're saying post-pandemic. I don't think we're post the pandemic. I think we're still learning. We're in the midst of learning. Yep. But at least I think that it's a year of patience. I think it's a year of or at least a year or moving forward. It's, people say patience, but I'm going to go back into a very specific word, listening. I encourage all educators to really listen, not only to the kids, but to the actual people in the classroom saying, hey, I don't know how, or I feel like I can't, or this feels impossible, or I am tired today. And instead of making it an evaluative point, finding ways to come together as a community to give relief to that person. I think so that's one. I think we need to start listening to each other and to what we're saying, and also not to like speak in melodrama or exaggerations, but really get to the essence of what we mean and what we're saying, because we should be reacting to it. I also think that we need to consider time just in general. Like, how are we using our time? What are we valuing in terms of time? Is a 6-hour day for teaching too long, especially when we're not across the board getting paid at a rate that reflects the people in the world? Adjuncts to professors, to teachers, to coaches, to tutors. We are the reason why you have innovation. If I look at everything that's in my office, all the people that have created or crafted or structured or engineered something was inspired by a teacher.
Exactly. Yes.
So down to someone growing my salad, to the clock behind me, to like you can't necessarily teach creativity, but you can teach the elements that get them to a creative thinking space. That is the higher order learning. Yep. And I think that we need to find spaces and find ways of eliciting a lot of interesting, new, creative education. I also, so that's my second piece of advice, is like, be open. And my third piece of advice is that this isn't all life. Like, my mom, one of the smartest women I know, she loved to tell me, I don't live to work. Oh no, I don't work to live. I live to work. You know what I mean? Like I'm not living for my job. There's so much
Exactly. Yeah,
more to
exactly.
live for. And so
Yeah.
I want to be in a space where I am, I want to be in a space where whatever I do, I am living and I'm
Mm.
modeling the kids how I live my life. And
Yeah.
teaching is a passion and an art form that I do well. And so I share that. Like, so there are people that go into teaching because it's a job, and that's fine.
Mm.
And then there's some people that go into it because it's a passion. And some people
Mm.
go into it because it's a craft. And
Mm.
no matter what it is, it doesn't take away from the fact that that isn't the describer of who they are.
Mm.
And so while we are in this like awakening, I think we need to be like awake to the idea that my time and my human capital deserves payment,
Mm. Mm.
that while I volunteer hours and volunteer for community, that my knowledge is worth payment.
Yeah.
And my creativity is also worth payment. And
Mm. Mm.
however that works out, it's still worth some sort of value. And if I can't get it in an educational space, that's fine, because I am not my job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somewhere we'll find the value of that for me. Like teaching doesn't have to just be because I have the license for it. So that's my third piece of advice. Like, you might not be a traditional teacher, but everyone's a teacher.
Yep. I totally agree with you there. And in terms of, the tips, one of the things I've always said, educators need to start taking more care of themselves. Self-care is valuable because
Mm-hmm.
that's an aspect we tend to forget, that if we are not taking care of ourselves, we cannot take care of our students.
I want to work to live. That's why I'm
Exactly.
working. I want to work to live. I want to live a life. I want
Yes.
to go see the Northern Lights. I love dancing salsa with my husband. I
Yeah.
want to go and grow my garden. I want to sit and watch my plants grow. Sometimes I do that because that's the life I want to live. And
Mm-hmm.
all those things are valid because though that's my time. I own that.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that there are some teachers that feel like if I don't show up, and this is advice to myself, if I don't show up, the world's going to crumble. It won't, because we already went through that.
Exactly. Yeah.
We already
Yeah.
did that.
It is so very true. Yeah. Yeah. So
So
very, very true.
that's my advice.
Thank you very, very, very much. It was fantastic. I do appreciate you coming on and share your story. And it was a very different angle, which is lovely,
Thank you.
because we are all going through the same challenge, regardless of whatever country we're from. And that's what this platform have actually taught me, that an educator in the Caribbean with one in the US, one in the UK, we are all going through the same struggle of the anxiety, the uncertainty, the tiredness, the not taking self-care, all of that. So we have more in common than we ever care to imagine. So it is so important that we begin to realize that and say, okay, we have a lot in common. Let's share it to see how we could support each other. Because it could just be by someone saying something that make you reflect and think, oh my goodness, I never thought of that. I need to start implementing that within my classroom, within myself. So those are some of the reasons why I think it's important that I continue to do this platform and get educators from around the world to start sharing our stories and what's going on with us and how we are able to navigate and, how we could support each other.
I think that's wonderful. I just say
thank you so very much.
Lead from humanity. Do it from humanity.
Yep, I totally agree with you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, my Facebook audience. Thank you very much, all my other educators that have been on the platform sharing their wonderful experience. It is so wonderful because whenever you share something, everybody actually learn from it because we have a lot more in common than we ever care to imagine. So good night, people. Take care. Stay blessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll see you guys tomorrow on another session.